Good afternoon. I'm Theresa Skorseth. It is the 26th of October, 2015.
27th.
27th of October, 2015. We're continuing a conversation that we started with Jim Rothstein. But before we get back to that, because we got a lot of really good stuff, but Robin has got some recent occurrences in her life she'd like to talk about. Robin?
Well, a while back, it's funny how I stumble onto the oddest things at just the right moment, and I'm not even digging for or looking for certain things when I stumble upon all kinds of interesting stuff, and this is one of those things. And I don't remember when I found this, but the League of Minnesota Cities has this thing called the City Spot. It's their blog. And in reading through, this is dated Thursday, March 26, 2015. That's not when I found it, but that's when this writer wrote this. Research cue of the week, public hearings and rearranging the furniture. And that's what caught my eye. 3/26/15. Question, does the City Council have to provide a public comment period for its meetings? Answer, most city councils have chosen to provide some type of public comment period at their meetings, but the truth is that the open meeting law does not give the public the right to speak at city council meetings. As a result, it's up to individual cities to decide if and how the public can participate during a council meeting. Public hearings are another story. The whole point of a public hearing, discretionary or required, is to provide an opportunity for the public to comment about a particular issue, and the role of city council members is to respectfully listen. Council members should not discuss issues among themselves or debate with the member of the public that provide input during a public hearing. That happens here a lot, though. Have you noticed?
Yeah.
It's their time to shine. There's some P's and Q's for public meetings and hearings that can keep these important listening opportunities golden. The law doesn't give members of the public the right to talk or for however long or about whatever topic they want at public hearings or at a council meeting where public comment is permitted. City councils have authority to regulate their own procedure and can adopt reasonable parameters regarding public participation, such as regulations that limit the amount of the time for each speaker, and that require speakers to restrict their comments to issues relating to city business or to the public hearing at issue. Members of the public do not have a right to remain at council meetings or public hearings if they are disrupting the proceedings. For example, a Minnesota woman who was recently convicted of disorderly conduct, that'd be me, after police removed her from a city council meeting for being disruptive. But I wasn't disruptive, isn't that ironic? When the woman arrived at the council meeting, she removed a chair from the public gallery, placed it directly in front of the council's bench, and refused requests for her to move back to the public gallery. These rules can keep a meeting running, give opportunity for the public to be heard in a fair manner, and keep the furniture from becoming a point of contention. But see, who made the furniture a point of contention was President Don Klinker by inviting up the mayor's husband and his mother, so the mayor's mother-in-law, and 5 others to come and sit exactly where I sat around the removed tables, because they removed them between July 3rd and July 7th, they took all the tables away and the chairs that were there. But he did this furniture rearranging, actually. The council did that themselves. This was written by Susan Naughton, research attorney with the League of Minnesota Cities. Then it gives her phone number, 651-281-1232, should you want to call her. Now, here are my comments, and she actually posted them. And I made these comments April 3rd, so that's when I found this. I wonder why the writer didn't print the fact that my illegal arrest is being appealed with the Minnesota Court of Appeals. I wonder why the writer didn't include information about the council meeting 4 days prior where 7 other individuals, including the mayor's husband and mother-in-law, were allowed to sit in the same area that I was denied. Actually, it is no wonder why this writer did not mention the fact that I was exercising my free speech and demanding my equal rights. It is also no surprise that this biased organization is highlighting my case. Of course, the League of Minnesota Cities would brag about this in an attempt to encourage other councils to wield their power to chill free speech and deny equal rights. No surprise here at all. Readers should know that the writer has intentionally left out a great deal of pertinent public information to distort the reality of the event. Abuse of power is evident at every level of government, all the way from Little Falls to Washington, D.C. American exceptionalism, right? One more tidbit for the writer. The information I just shared on this comment thread will be highlighted today on my public blog and on my television show, which is broadcast on local public access TV. Taxpayers have a right to know how the League of Minnesota Cities uses taxpayer dollars. Not only the League of Minnesota Cities taxpayer dollars, because that's spread amongst all the taxpayers in Minnesota. You're paying for my appeal and all of it, okay? Everybody, Chris is paying for it. How this works is, my prosecution was at the discretion of Brian Mindorf, this county attorney. And boy, are we gonna have another blasting show on that coming up about that discretionary power that he used to prosecute my case, but not any of the criminals who committed crimes against me about a month ago. And his decision to prosecute this disorderly conduct charge is costing huge amounts of dollars, and I'll be the very one to share at least the dollar amounts that I have in my possession, which are limited to what I can see that the city has paid out to Paul Reaver so far. And I'm not going to quote a figure, but it's into the thousands already. But we haven't even come to appeal time. That's coming up now in November. And not included in those figures are, because they'll never give them to me, because they don't want me to share it, will be the city attorney's time here, Tony Wetzel, and Brian Middendorf's time, and everything in between. It's outrageous that the city chose to do this, but enough on that. Now I want to talk a little bit about this odd thing that showed up in my recycle bin out back today. My recycle gets collected on Thursday, and I put my recycle out yesterday because I was outside doing something else. I get the oddest things delivered to me in the oddest ways, but I'm finding out after talking to Jim about this, it's not that odd, and he'll explain why he thinks I get things like this. I get letters, people come to my front door. I had a woman email me just a couple days ago about another matter, and she hasn't written back yet, but she's asking for my help because she feels she was wrongly evicted from her place of residence, and she names the person who she thinks lied. And this, I don't think is it's meant for me to see, but it's not about me, I don't think. But for whatever reason, they left this in the box, the collector box for my recycle. Becky, can't believe it's come to this. I'm so tired of everybody thinking because I stole some copper in the past, that all I do is take, and steal from them. You must be out of your effing mind. Yet here I sit punished with hatred and vengeance for what? Something that can come to your mind? And why was it there? The thought of stealing from you is absurd. Not only do I want to share my pain, but my joys with you. It isn't a money thing with me, or I'd have some, don't you think? Want to build you up and put you upon a pedestal where you belong, and maybe you help me up to see myself next to you on that pedestal. However, I'm not garbage that needs to be stomped down with glass.
This is such a mysterious document. We don't know who Becky is. The note on this piece of cardboard is unsigned, so we don't know who wrote it, which is fine. And we don't know why it ended up in Robin's recycling bin. We don't know if it was put there by the writer, if it was put there by this Becky, or found by someone else and they just tucked it in the closest recycling bin they found just to be finished with it, or what. It's a mystery.
Well, I showed it to Jim, and Jim says he gets things like this fairly frequently.
Well, what would you call it then, Jim? How do you see it?
Well, it's very simple, going way back when, and we will, as we go into the church business here, you will see one of the most unbelievable things I've had like that. I've had stuff under windshield wiper blades, doors, you name it. many, many different things given to me over the years. And usually it's based on the fact that they have nobody left to go to. I have asked many, many people, why are you giving it to me? Well, we know we can trust you, and we know you have integrity. And if I tell them that anybody who wants to give me information, I will not divulge them. And as I think I mentioned on the last show, on one time after I was put on the witness stand, I had received information from a black prostitute on 8th Avenue, what is in society is probably considered the very lowest of the world. And when I was taken to court, as you know, the defense has the right to meet the accuser. And the defense attorney said, Judge, ordered the detective to tell us who told him. And the judge says, you have to do this. I says, Your Honor, I cannot do that. And he says, I will hold you in contempt of court and throw you in jail till you talk. And with that, I stood up and held up my hands, in other words, referencing put handcuffs on him, but I ain't talking. Well, I hate to tell you that the courthouse cleared because everybody knew that what might happen, right? So anyhow, the judge, being a very wise man, said, that's what I like, detectives that will stand up and protect their people, even in light of going to jail, because just a week before, one of my partners had done the same thing. We were all guys assigned, and we had the right to do this. You know, it goes against what's given, but we had to protect our people.
your source,
that
yeah.
was the only way you can get information. These people have been run down and destroyed, and you will find there are people all over that will just call and tell you things. We've just had a few among the last show that we did that came forward. So you always have those people calling you.
So in
Yes.
other words, they can't get justice in the local court system
Yeah.
or at City Hall,
Yeah.
so they come to me with their beefs and complaints
Yeah.
or stories
Yeah.
because they think that I can help them in some way. I'm honored that they would do
Yes,
that.
well,
But-
it's just like I told you that Jane Doe 1 in the previous show. We're sitting at the table, 14 feet away is the acting police chief of the St. Cloud Police Department. And I said to her, why don't we go to him and tell him? She says, oh, you can't trust the cops. She didn't necessarily mean he was crooked or anything, but what she meant was, I don't know what they're gonna do if they know how to handle this or not.
Right.
So
Or that
this
he wouldn't
is-
do something
Yeah,
at all.
and this is why people do this. And I
Yeah.
have had it, I wouldn't know how many times over my life. So I find it quite ordinary.
So my appeal is coming up in November, and I'll be sure to share the decision whenever that is. I don't remember how many months that the 3 judges, and they are 3 female judges down in St. Paul, what their decision will be. But whatever it is, I'll be happily sharing that with the public. And if my lawyer, Kevin Rich, and I are not able to get my conviction overturned, both of us are committed to going on to the Minnesota Supreme Court and beyond if we need to, so that people are aware I'm not giving up because I did not commit disorderly conduct. I would have had to use fighting words, which I didn't.
No, you did not. I was there.
And the jury was not instructed of that key point, that I would have had to use fighting words to commit disorderly conduct. And interestingly enough, in some of the charges that were just dismissed of the crimes that were committed against me, Brian Middendorf uses those exact words as a reason to throw out that case. So more on that. I'll be happy to share exact wordage from those decisions, why Brian Middendorf made those decisions, but that's a whole nother show
Yeah.
yet to come. Now, I want to mention a letter that myself and a bunch of other people that Colleen Rowley wanted to alert to something. This just came this morning. I printed the article, didn't get a chance to read through it, but I want to let the public know about this so they can do their own research if they want and look this article up. Colleen Rowley is, of course, former FBI in Minneapolis Division, and she has been joining us before on shows, one that was with Jim, and one of my good friends, and she's also a co-peace activist, and Teresa's a friend of hers as well. She writes Since there is no military draft, no higher taxes, as war costs continue to be put on the national debt card, with the debt limit to be increased shortly, heading to 20 trillion, no troop casualties except for suicides, which is no small potatoes, by the way, and nonstop effective war propaganda, Americans have largely ceased caring about their ongoing wars that now encompass a half dozen countries, but which they are made to believe only kill and hurt foreigners. But maybe with little indications like this, some Americans will begin to finally understand how their wars over there are migrating home. There are no boundaries in the global war on terror, which means we are all beginning to live not only in a police state, but in a war zone. Okay, and the article that she references is one titled, "Did the U.S. Navy break federal laws to push war games over national forests?" And while we're talking here a little bit, I'm going to pull this up. It's an article written on Truth Out. Just one second here. Make sure to look this article up and read it in its entirety. It's written by Dar Jamal. That's Dahrjamail. Dar Jamal. Did the U.S. Navy break federal laws to push war games over national forests? And it begins with this. The U.S. Navy aims to begin conducting electromagnetic warfare training across much of Washington State's Olympic Peninsula soon. Meanwhile, it is being accused of breaking federal laws in order to secure the permits necessary to move forward with its training operations. Karen Sullivan worked for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for 15 and a half years and is an expert in the bureaucratic procedures the Navy is supposed to be following. She's now part of the West Coast Action Alliance, one of the two large multi-state and international citizen groups who have tasked themselves with watchdogging the Navy due to what they believe are ongoing violations of the law, blatant acts of disrespect toward human and environmental health, and ongoing bellicose behavior by the military branch in their areas. And I won't go any further because we want to spend a lot of time here on the information that Jim has. And so, but read that article, folks, and there's a lot of other stuff in our next shows that we'll want to talk about, with things like the Ku Klux Klan's relation to the Catholic Church and all kinds of interesting stuff. So Jim, you wrote this letter dated June 19th of 2018 to His Holiness Pope Francis. And the subject is failure to act on sex abuse. Bishop Donald Kettler, Diocese of St. Cloud, Minnesota, and Abbot John Clausen, Abbey of St. John's, Collegeville, Minnesota. On June 18th, 2014, I, James Rothstein, met with Bishop Kettler, see page 7, paragraph 2, and advised the bishop of many cases of sexual abuse in the St. Cloud Diocese, St. John's Abbey, and the church. The bishop was given an expanded copy of the enclosed report titled Church and copies of supporting documentation. I verbally explained the full extent of the problem and what my expertise was, much of which is outlined in the report. As of June 19, 2015, I've never heard from the bishop. As a detective in the New York City Police Department, I was assigned to investigate human trafficking, including the sexual abuse associated with the trafficking. I testified as an expert in both the local and federal courts. The governor of New York State, Hugh Carey, assigned me to the New York State Select Committee on Crime to find the effects these crimes had on society. At the request of Congressman Charlie Rose, I wrote a confidential report on human trafficking, associated crimes, corruption, and cover-ups. My involvement with the investigations into the Catholic Church in 1971 and 1978 gave me the expertise to understand what had happened to the church as a detective and as a devout Catholic who felt he had to do his duty as a true Catholic. Supporting Father Bruce Ritter in 1990, when he was falsely accused and failed to get support from the church, was the ultimate disgrace of the church. I request that Bishop Kettler and Abbot Clausen be brought before the tribunal for bishop negligence that you, Pope Francis, created. The tribunal must take great care to assure that the accused are in fact guilty and not the figment of incompetent investigators and prosecutors' imagination. Immediate action is requested. If the Church had followed Pope John Paul I's request of Father Bruce Ritter working with Detective Rosenthal and Detective Rothstein in 1978, the Church would not be self-destructing.
Yes, that is true. I filed that complaint, and to this date, which is October 27th, I have not heard one word back. One copy was sent direct to the Pope in Rome. The other copy was sent to the Apostolic Nuncio in Washington, D.C. I have not heard a thing.
There's some pretty damning information in this multi-page report here. And I would consider some of what's been brought to light here embarrassing to the Church. Scathing information about the Church, the corruption within the Church and the Vatican itself, and frankly, shocking information is included in this document. I hope we have time to discuss it all, but maybe to begin, I should read this Compromising the Church.
Yes, because the original investigations that we got into were not the pedophilia in the Church, but it started with how the Church was compromised. And when you read that Compromising the Church, anybody who hears this will know how evident it was what happened here. But what's even more astounding is you have never, ever heard it mentioned in any religious context, public media, or anything. So if you want, Robin, read that, and it'll let the people know what really happened.
Detective Rothstein of the New York City Police Department was advised by unknown person/persons to go to a certain room in the federal courthouse in New York City to review some documents. These documents verified that the Church was a victim of compromise. In the Odessa operation, many of the Nazis at the end of World War II were put into the Franciscan order and disguised as Catholic priests. Many of them ended up in Central and South America. Verification of this was received when a Mr. Goldman contacted Detective Rothstein. Bella Dodd, who was a leader of the Communist Party of America, CPUSA, in the 1930s and 1940s, explained what she did while working as a communist and then describes her conversion back to the Catholic faith thanks to Bishop Fulton Sheen. Dr. Dodd served as legal counsel attorney for the communists. Her book, School of Darkness, 1954, reveals that communism was penetrated by financiers to control the common man and to advance world tyranny. She also testified before the U.S. Un-American Activities Committee, speaking as a former high-ranking official of the American Communist Party. Mrs. Dodd said, in the 1930s, we put 1,100 men into the priesthood in order to destroy the Church from within. The idea was for these men to be ordained and progress to positions of influence and authority as monsignors and bishops. A dozen years before Vatican II, she stated that right now they are in the highest places in the Church, where they are working to bring about change in order to weaken the Church's effectiveness against communism. She also said that these changes would be so drastic that you will not recognize the Catholic Church. The infiltration of the Catholic Church was further described by an agent whose true identity is unknown except for a code number AA-1025, given the Russian secret police, meaning anti-apostle number 1025. There had been 1024 agents like him before him. Some have risen to the rank of archbishop and cardinal, many of whom could have been heads of departments in the Curia, papal government, and religious congregations. This has been challenged for accuracy and truth, but seemed to verify other accusations. Years later, Bishop Nilitsa helped the Russian KGB to exert the same influence on the Vatican. In an 8-hour interview Rothstein had with Father Nicholas Gruner and Father Paul Kramer, they stated that they had reported Nilitz's activities of further pedophilia to authorities in the Vatican. The two priests were chastised, vilified, and harassed by the authorities in the Catholic Church. After these two programs were in place, they were able to expand on a weakness in the Church, pedophilia. This led to the scandal that has been exposed in the Catholic Church, which is only the tip of the iceberg. Skull Murphy provided Detective Rothstein with compromising information on Cardinal Nellie Spellman so that Spellman could not interfere with Detective Rothstein's investigation. Spellman had been molesting a young boy from the West Side, Jack the Sailor. Jack was caught running from Spellman's residence and arrested for stealing Cardinal Spellman's shoes. In court, Spellman had the charges dismissed. For instance, from the days of Cardinal Spellman to the present, no scandals have been reported. There is no way that these hidden scandals will be prosecuted as long as individuals like Robert Morgenthau are the district attorney in New York City. Any district attorney or prosecutor who routinely covers up these crimes against children by politically connected pedophiles, such as this man did, assures these crimes against children will remain hidden from the public.
Yep.
And
there
now,
you go. Yep.
Do you want to comment here, and then I'll
Yes.
read that last chapter there?
Yes, this is how we got started on it. It was just amazing. You know, you just talked about your little note you got in the basket. Can you imagine when I received a request for me to go to the federal courthouse? And it was really strange. That place is a bustling place. I was told bring no paper, no pencil, and no camera. And I got up to the floor, to the room. There was not a soul on the hallways or anything. I went in that room, I guess I was there a couple hours, and there were files that outlined everything that Jesus Angleton and the OSS CIA did because they had compromised Pope Pius XII. Not that he was a pedophile, but he had been compromised because of his homosexuality. And as you know, in those days, just being a homosexual was enough to destroy you. Well, they used that. And Mr. Goldman, when he called me after I had done that, it was a while later, there had been a Russian U-boat scuttled off the coast of South America where these people had gone, which was exactly what I saw in those notes. Mr. Goldman, over my career, and I think the last time I heard from him was about 5 years ago. I do not know who he is. I don't know what, but many times when, as follow-up to information I get, he will call. There were some other instances on the Watergate break-in, what had actually transpired, that there was a pedophile ring operating and all that was another one. There have been different occasions.
So you're still hearing from him?
Yes, I am. The last time was about 5 years ago.
Oh my goodness.
And as we find out, as we get into the church thing, when they went, John Paul I had ordered Father Bruce Ritter to do gave him a special dispensation to clean the pedophiles out of the church. And again, myself and Detective Rosenthal were assigned to that. And 10 days later, the Pope was dead. And what was amazing is that we got the informant from 2 FBI agents from Detroit through the confessional of Father Bruce Ritter. And the reason that was done was so that we wouldn't know who the 2 agents were. But this young boy was the key witness to what had transpired in John Paul's death. And he later would tell us that the people who was responsible for it, I won't mention the names right now, but it fit into our information. And then eventually, after we got done and everything, Father Bruce Ritter was falsely accused of being a pedophile. And when I went to bat for him, I called Cardinal O'Connor in New York, and he asked me to stay back because the church would be destroyed if the truth ever got out why Father Bruce Ritter was accused. And the reason he was accused, all the victims that came to him over the years told him what had happened to them. There were names of powerful, powerful people, and they needed to destroy Ritter, which is par for the course. It is quite common, and I've had many of my people, including Ben Rose, and the list goes on, that after we were using him, they would be convicted to discredit them. So that's what happened there. And eventually they had me call Peter Grace, who supposedly was the highest lay Catholic from W.R. Grace Shipping. And again, they asked me to stay back on it. But all of a sudden, nobody ever continued going after Bruce Ritter because they knew I was involved. And so this is how this all started. And then when I came back to Minnesota, I was approached by 3 priests and 2 other individuals, and that's why St. John's came up. And for the same reason, it was not to badmouth it, but it was to protect them. It was to help them because of how they were being extorted and set up. So this is how I got into that whole thing. It never started, and we had very early in our investigations come upon the clergy abuse. And what that coincided with exactly what you just heard Robin read about infiltration and stuff like that. We had the names, the cardinals that fit in that category. There was a priest, Father Hugh Burns, would preach about that. And he was chastised because he told the truth. He would testify that there were criminals in charge and they had to be prosecuted. So you can see it's not a vendetta. And what I find the most appalling is, like I said before, am I still a Catholic? Yes, I am. And I'm proud of it. But I also learned as a young Catholic, you don't put up with this stuff. It is up to us to stop it.
To the lay people.
Yes,
of the church.
because you take a place like St. John's. And this was described to me, and I can use the one priest's name, Father Paul Marcus. He says, Jim, look at this beautiful place we have to serve our religion and stuff like that. And yet, this element is destroying it. And I have a list. It shows, in fact, you can go right on the website behind the pine curtain and see the list of all the perpetrators. But what is the most amazing thing is, till currently, and even now there has never, ever been an arrest or prosecution. Isn't that just amazing?
It is
and numbers, I think the number's up to 82. If you go on the Pine Curtain, you can see that. And
I want to repeat that website. It's Behind the Pine Curtain.
Yeah.
And there you can find perpetrators. You can find the names of people who have been responsible for a lot of this.
And these are local Minnesota priests.
yes, but they're from all over the world. Anything that belonged to the Benedictine order and that. And even our investigations took us into all of that, of how they all operated, what was behind. But the big thing was that they ended up being compromised and how they were able to do it. And it's not hard to figure out. In our investigations, we had big corporations that were infiltrated and paid millions and millions of dollars in extortion fees. We had, in fact, what's just amazing is you just have a new prime minister in Canada. I don't know if you read the part where Geraldo Rivera was bragging how he had gone to bed with his mother. But they didn't bother to tell you that the father had been one of our victims, where 3 of my people were supplying him with little boys and extorting him. And this gets, into all these different levels. Corporations, we have many of them. So it doesn't just affect the church. It's just we never look into it. And then if you want the greatest scandal of all is the Watergate break-in. As everybody thinks, this was just a bunch of guys breaking in and they come up with all kinds of stuff. Well, first of all, there was a detective in Washington by the name of Carl Schaffler. Carl Schaffler and his so-called partner, I mentioned him before, Robert Merritt, they knew that this break-in was going to happen a month before it happened. And the reason the break-in was going to happen was that there was a book in there for prostitution, both male and female. They called it a pedophile book. In all these things, the book could be on computer or whatever, but it keeps a record of what the customer name is, what he wants, and how much he pays. Well, if these people, the burglars, who happened to be, one of them was Frank Sturgis, a guy that I had run into in the Kennedy assassination, the Bay of Pigs and all of that. And I ended up arresting him in New York when he came to kill Marita Lorenz. So if you look at that, you will see, and what were they going to do? Whoever got that file, there were both Democrats and Republicans using that service for sex. All them people would have been compromised. Can you imagine the power whoever was the real people behind the burglary would have had? So you can see it's not always what you think it is. Like, there was one of the burglars was an informant. And I have, you know, I don't go into who that was, but one of them was an informant, plus Robert Merritt. So we know, and I talked to Schaffler many times about it, and we also knew this was going on because there was another case, and it's all documented, a guy by the name of Paul Abrams in New York that was tied to this. And when we went after him, the New York City attorney, Robert Morgenthau, had his people go in and bust the joint to get the files because we were going to put a wiretap in there. And they stopped it because they knew what we'd find out. So this is why when I go into this, don't think it's just the church. But in this particular instance, that's what we're talking about, is the church. So, and then I even write where I say that it's not picking on the Catholics. It's because they're the victims.
Yeah, exactly.
And don't think there aren't any other churches. There were a lot of them. In fact, only one church ever stepped up, and I will mention their name because they had the honesty to do it, was the Pentecostal church. And I met with the leaders of the Pentecostal church, and this is really, in a way, it's sad, in a room in a lumber yard with no windows. And where they were offering me $2 million to do an investigation into this type of activity. And what was interesting is that they couldn't figure out how to give me the money without the IRS finding about and then taking away their tax-free exemption. So we didn't do it. But they came forward, and what was most interesting, they did not want any protection from it, that if I found anything in their church, it was open season. You know, so that was the only one that ever came forward.
That
and
is
I just couldn't believe it, you know, but it was true. And what was interesting that if you look at Jimmy Swaggart, if you remember how they destroyed Jimmy Swaggart, well, there was a reason. Because Jimmy Swaggart and what were known as some Bible, the preachers in the Bible belt down there, had gone against this pedophile business. And he was told, stay out of it. And he didn't. So the next thing they all knew, he had hookers and stuff like that. And that's when they went public and destroyed him. Because he had written a book about this, and I can't find it. I saw it once, but I never saw it again, where he described in the Bible Belt the preachers that were killed and the pedophilia that was taking place. So it's always interesting, you know, they talk about conspiracies. Well, the thing is, I don't talk about conspiracies. I talk about what I saw. I was there. You know, just like the Watergate break-in thing. I lock up Frank Sturgis. He was one of the burglars, and he flat out told me, he says, you know, you don't get caught doing these break-ins unless somebody wants you caught.
Yeah.
So you can see how this was all set up way ahead of time. It has nothing to do with what the historians are writing about. So again, not that I'm making excuses for the church, but let's just remember, this isn't just the church.
Right. So this paragraph called Church, Father Bruce Ritter reads, in 1968, Father Bruce Ritter, a Franciscan priest, started a program for helping victims of trafficking or those who were lost in our society on the Lower East Side of New York City. Almost immediately, Detective Rothstein was assigned to an investigation to determine if it was legal or a front for trafficking or pedophilia. The investigation found no illegalities. In fact, his work was very effective in helping the victims. In 1972, Father Ritter opened Covenant House on 8th Avenue and 43rd Street in New York City. Covenant House became a safe sanctuary for the victims, and many were helped to become productive members of society. On or about September 19th, 1978, Detective Rosenthal and Detective Rothstein met with Father Ritter at his office at the Covenant House. During the meeting, Father Ritter received a call from Pope John Paul I. The Pope gave Father Ritter a special dispensation to clean the pedophiles out of the church and clean up the Vatican bank. Detective Rosenthal and Detective Rothstein agreed to take on the case. The plan agreed by the Pope, Ritter, and the two detectives was that there had to be a complete disclosure of all pedophile, sex abuse, etc. The church was to practice what it preached: admit to their sins, repent, apologize to the victims, and take care of the victims' needs. At the end of the meeting, after saying a prayer, Father Ritter stated that the odds that the detectives being successful was 1 in a million, and that he who worked for a higher power would also be stopped. They agreed to continue. If this openness in the Catholic Church had happened and the cover-up stopped, the church would have been more powerful than ever. They chose to be hypocrites, and the cover-up continues to the present time, destroying the credibility of the church. Approximately 10 days later, the Pope was murdered. Dale Smith would tell Rothstein that Cardinal Ratzinger covered up all pedophile accusations in the church, and Archbishop Marcinkus, am I saying that right? Vatican Bank, were behind the murder of Pope John Paul I. Marcinkus had a brother, a lieutenant in the United States Army. Father Ritter introduced a young man, Dale Smith, or Dale St. Clair, to the State Select Committee on Crime. Dale was a victim of pedophilia and actively involved in the pedophile underground. Dale told Rothstein that as a boy, his father, who was a very wealthy Canadian, had decided that his son should become a priest. Dale was sent to the Vatican to study to be a priest. That was not all his father wanted. He wanted his son to become pope. When Dale returned from the Vatican to Canada, he told his father, "Papa, you didn't tell me I had to do this," in parentheses, be molested, to become a priest. Dale's father took him to the FBI in Detroit, Michigan. The FBI agents took Dale to Father Bruce Ritter and used the secrecy of the confessional to make the introduction to Ritter. The FBI agents took Dale to Father Ritter because they knew that they would not be allowed to investigate his case. They knew that Father Ritter was working with the State Select Committee on Crime, and that Detective Rosenthal and Detective Rothstein would be the only investigators to take on such a case. Father Ritter would tell Rothstein that it was true what Dale had said. Dale was molested by members of the Legion of Christ in the Vatican. The leader of the Legion of Christ was Marcial, who was accused of molesting children. Cardinal Ratzinger, Pope Benedict the 16th?
Yes.
Covered up the accusations against Marcial for many years. On March 25, 2010, his abuse was verified by the Vatican. In 1989, the first of many accusations of misconduct was made by Kevin Kite against Father Ritter. Father Ritter had to be stopped, destroyed, and discredited. Father Ritter had kept accurate records of the information he received from the victims he had helped. These files contained information that would have exposed many powerful people. In 1990, when Detective Rothstein first received word that Father Bruce Ritter had been accused of misconduct, Rothstein was living in Maine. Rothstein was astounded but not surprised. Father Ritter had stepped on big toes. Rothstein had advised Father Ritter to stay out of the real estate business when he wanted to buy a hotel to expand Covenant House. Rothstein immediately contacted Cardinal O'Connor in New York City. When Rothstein told the Cardinal, "You know he is innocent, why don't you protect him?" Cardinal O'Connor said, "There's nothing we can do." Cardinal O'Connor advised Rothstein to contact Peter Grace, the highest lay Catholic in New York. Peter Grace was the head of W.R. Grace Shipping Lines. Rothstein had many conversations with Peter Grace. Grace asked Rothstein to back off because an investigation into the Catholic Church would destroy the church. The church will protect guilty pedophile priests, but throw honest priests to the wolves. Father Bruce Ritter was sacrificed so the cover-up of pedophilia in the church could continue. The cover-up continued with the demise of Father Ritter. In the last communication with Detective Rothstein, dated November 20th, 1991, Father Ritter stated many times, when God did not protect me, he let me find that comfort in you. He died on October 7th, 1999. Over the years, Detective Rothstein never found any credible or questionable misconduct by Father Bruce Ritter. In the mid or late 2000s, Rothstein was notified by a phone call from Brazil that Dale had died. His real name remains unknown to this day. And there's another chapter on St. John's we'll cover in a minute, but how did he die, do you know?
No, I don't know how he died. In fact, the guy that called me was the person who was the perpetrator on East 64th Street when the 3 little boys were killed.
Oh.
And he called to let me know that Dale had died, because there was a place in northern Brazil where they all went to for safekeeping and protection, the different people that I had dealt with that were involved in this. So, yes, that was that. And we can do this separate, the St. John's end of it, but this is why it's so important, if you understand this, that if they did and helped these victims, and Theresa has a letter, the latest communication. She also has the letter from Father Ritter that you referred to, where he tells me that when God was not there to comfort him, he found that comfort in me. And for years, I never really looked at it till years later, and then I fully got to understand what he was talking about. But to show you how this is up to date, this is a communication Theresa has there, the latest and last one I got on St. John's. And we're waiting for it to be made public, but I think you could give them the date and that it's real, and just touch on how the victim, why the family is coming forward.
I'm going to try to read this without revealing anyone's identity, because to protect the family. After reading the recent news regarding, can I use the name of the priest?
Yeah.
Regarding Father Tom Andert, we feel compelled to speak out regarding our own family's history with Father Andert and the leadership at St. John's Abbey. We feel a responsibility to raise awareness, particularly within the St. John's community, regarding the very real effects of sexual and psychological abuse, which is all the more devastating when the community remains silent. Our family's silence has come at a cost. Just 8 months ago to the day, our family suffered the loss of our son, and I'm going to call him Junior, to suicide. Junior was a victim of sexual and psychological abuse by Father Tom Andert in the mid-1990s, while Junior was a minor student, and Father Andert was the headmaster at St. John's Prep School. Junior brought the abuse allegations to Abbot Timothy Kelly while he was still a student at SJP. Abbot Kelly advised Junior to stay away from Father Andert. And then it goes on to talk about other steps that they tried to make and concerns that had fallen on deaf ears. I'm concerned about putting a human face on this, because we're talking about powers and principalities, and sometimes it just seems so far away. Junior chose not to go public with his St. John's experience because of his concern for the other people in his life. He sought to shield others from humiliation. Junior was particularly concerned about his grandfather, who had been the food service director of the St. John's community for 20 years. His father, and again, also had a relationship with the school, and his uncles and cousins who were alumni of the school. Junior was caught in a contradiction of a grossly inappropriate relationship in the midst of a highly principled, spiritual, and intellectual environment. Father Andert's sexual and psychological abuse was not consistent with the principles of the Catholic faith and the Benedictine rule. The cover-up of the abuse by Father Andert was an equally egregious breach of responsibility and principle. Not the least of these conflicts was Junior's own sexuality, in which his abuser assumed the lead in developing. Father Andert spent considerable time convincing Junior of his own homosexuality. Junior was painfully challenged while being groomed by the headmaster until the day of his passing. We are certain that Father Tom Andert abused his authority and responsibility as headmaster, priest, and family friend. This abuse led to Junior's first suicide attempt in 1994 while still a student at SJP. This was the beginning of a lifelong battle with depression and anxiety that ultimately ended in Junior's suicide in December of 2014. Father Andert inserted himself into our son's life, usurped and challenged our parental role, and acted recklessly and irresponsibly. Father Andert changed Junior's grades, pulled him from class, served him alcohol, kissed, touched, caressed, and exposed himself to him. Are some of these actions and behaviors illegal and subject to prosecution? Probably. Are all of these behaviors contrary to a headmaster's charge? Absolutely. Are any of these behaviors worthy of a leader of our St. John's community? And he leaves that question unanswered. We know our son was not alone. We know that there are other unnamed perpetrators, and we believe that Father Tom Andert isolated, groomed, seduced, and abused other vulnerable young people. Junior supported efforts to change what he called a horrible culture of hypocrisy at St. John's. It is this culture of silence, shame, and secrecy that has caused so much damage. Will you demand accountability and action so that the victims can come forward without guilt and the cycle of abuse can finally be broken? Every day since the day of Junior's suicide, we have cried for the loss of Junior, who is a precious gift from God. Every day we pray that Junior rests in peace with his Savior. Every day we pray that our family's experience does not have to be endured by others. And every day we pray that the cycle of abuse and silence at St. John's will be broken and be replaced by healing. And this letter was signed by both parents who, after their signatures, styled themselves still a devout and faithful Catholic.
And Chris, is it all right if we go over by, say, 15, 20 minutes here? Because it's important to, okay. I don't want to stop here because there's so much other stuff, extra stuff in here that we really need to at least touch
Yes,
on.
I would touch on this one
Yeah.
from the student from the high school.
Right,
Yes.
that's one we can't leave out.
Yeah.
This was written in 2013 by a 15-year-old freshman at Albany High School and wrote the following for her English class. "The Crimes at St. John's" is the title of it. "Contrary to popular belief, Minnesota is not a safe, innocent place." This is 15 years old is writing this. Mm-hmm. In fact, Stearns County in the heart of the state is the most dangerous place in the Midwest. The cause of this danger is the major ring of pedophilia at St. John's University, which has been thoroughly covered up for decades. No one at the school is safe, at least not while the accused pedophiles are allowed to roam freely among them at the university. In most cases, when an alleged victim accuses someone of a crime, there's always some element of doubt that their allegations are accurate, unless there's a witness or another victim. In this case, the allegations do not stop at St. John's University, nor do they stop with one victim. They are all alleged victims at St. John's Preparatory School. There are also alleged victims at the preparatory school. St. John's Abbey, the Liturgical Press, Hill Museum, Manuscript Library, and the School of Theology in Collegeville, Minnesota, all of which are associated with the university. Not only have there been just a few members of the St. John's community that have been accused of sexual abuse or misconduct, but over 40 people since 1940. These allegations range from sodomy and fondling to physical and sexual assault. The number of victims is absolutely nauseating, and this is me adding this, and it continues on with finding more victims because the attorney that's representing these victims is doing advertisements in small towns such as the Morrison County Record here recently. Okay, going on with this letter, not only a few dozen, but a few hundred. Over 300 victims have come forward, and those are just the ones that are brave enough to try and take a stand. Imagine the number of victims who are too afraid to come forward or are threatened and blackmailed not to, or are worried about their family's name. 300 victims divided by 40 pedophiles comes out to over 7 victims per accused person. The victims do not stop at male students, as many would believe. The list includes young men, women, monks, nuns, and even priests. As previously stated, no one is safe. The common denominator to all of these cases is the reason that the pedophilia ring is not public knowledge. None of the accused priests has been justly punished. There have been no arrests made, no thorough investigations at the happenings at the university. This is because St. John's and its affiliates believe they are above the law. They know that they can get away with these horrendous crimes because of that. They have the money and power to make sure that authorities are not brought into the investigations, and if they are, the authorities are told to stay away from convictions. The extent of the punishments from St. John's itself to the offenders usually only gets as severe as forced retirement or banning from campus at the worst. Why is St. John's above the law? Why do they feel they can get away with malicious crimes they are committing, especially when they are a Catholic community? They are supposed to follow their oaths that allowed them to attain the titles they have. They are not. They are consciously taking pleasure in the misuse and mistreatment of young people and are getting away with it as they have for decades. That's an astounding letter.
It's from a 15-year-old girl, yes. And if that is in the same school, a dear friend of mine's son committed suicide because of a priest who had molested him. So don't tell me this isn't going on and isn't affecting our community.
And can we talk about everything that's in this chapter?
Well, it's going to run a little past our time.
That's all right. Teresa can read fast.
Yeah, but I would leave it for the people to come show interest to get it and find out what it is.
Oh, so you don't
Yeah.
want us to talk about this?
Well, I don't care if you talk. No, go ahead, but I'm just saying, let the people, if they want to know about it, reach out. You can spoon feed them all you want. It's not going to help. But go ahead, go through it, whatever you want.
Well, there's a lot of interesting stuff in here, and
there
it's
is. Oh, yeah.
local.
Yes.
And so, Teresa, if you'll just read the St. John's, and it'll bring you right up to this where I wrote here, or
Crimes
where
at
I
St.
read.
John's?
Yeah. Have you got it?
I wonder if I have.
They're a
No, I
little
don't.
different. No, there's
Okay. St. John's Abbey of the Benedictine Order in Collegeville, Minnesota is a classic example of how the Catholic Church covers up child abuse in the church. Over a 40-year period of time, there were hundreds of abuse cases and suicides related to the abuse. In 2000, soon after John Clausen became the abbot at St. John's, Rothstein was asked by members of the clergy and lay employees of St. John's to meet with Abbot Clausen in hope of finding a solution to the pedophilia and sexual abuse which had been and was so rampant at St. John's. If action was not taken, a great honorable learning and religious center would be destroyed because of a handful of criminals. The first meeting with the abbot was arranged by a priest who had grown up in the same community with Rothstein and knew him well. When Rothstein arrived at the meeting and the abbot's office, Father Rene McGraw was also present. Early in the meeting, Father McGraw threatened Rothstein that if he continued in his pursuits into the allegations against St. John's, he could get hurt. Rothstein's response was, "Be prepared to defend yourself. It goes both ways." Soon after that, Father McGraw left the meeting. Rothstein informed the abbot that McGraw was one of the problems. The plan that had been decided upon with Pope John Paul I, Father Ritter and the detectives was presented to Abbot Clausen. Abbot Clausen agreed that this was a good plan and that he would do it. With this, Rothstein warned the abbot, "Your own people are going to stop you." The abbot did not believe him. A second meeting was set for 2 weeks later at the Olive Garden restaurant in St. Cloud. Abbot Clausen met with Rothstein at the restaurant and, in utter shock, admitted that there were at least 13 pedophile priests at the abbey. One of them was former abbot John Eidenschink. As of November 2012, the number had risen to 23, yet there were no arrests or prosecutions by either local, state, or federal authorities over this 40-year period of time. There were numerous suicides of victims of abuse at St. John's. One example was the suicide of Christopher Clare, in 2001. Clare was a victim of Father Gillespie. When Rothstein contacted the father, Dennis Clare, this would be the father of the victim, the father said he always wondered what had happened to make his son commit suicide. He said he should have seen what was happening to his son after he came into the clutches of Father Gillespie. He did not recognize the changes in his son's behavior. He said he never thought that a priest would do such a thing. Christopher was a student at Albany High School. Shortly before Dennis Clare died, he called Rothstein to ask him to never forget his son and never stop pursuing Father Gillespie and other pedophile priests abusing children. In 2002, Josh Gamond, a student at St. John's, disappeared in the middle of the night under suspicious circumstances. The family contacted retired Detective Rothstein immediately and asked for his advice and assistance. In April 2002, 1 week prior to the story Sana Kids by Kelly O'Mara regarding clergy abuse at St. John's, 1 week prior to the story being published in Insight magazine, Rothstein informed Abbot Clausen about the article. The abbot was advised by Rothstein to go public on the Friday before the story was to break as a tactical move by the abbot. Shortly after 5 p.m. on the Friday prior to the article being published, Abbot Clausen went public about clergy abuse at St. John's in an email to all, quote, Johnnies. What is...
That's the nickname for anybody who went to St. John's or anybody associated with it.
Sure, okay. After numerous meetings, Rothstein met the abbot at Chatty's restaurant in St. Cloud. One of the victims who had been helped by Abbot Clausen was present. The abbot saw that his diligence and hard work had saved the victim. As the meeting broke up, Abbot Clausen pulled Rothstein aside and sadly told Rothstein, "I've been stopped," meaning he'd been compromised, just like Rothstein had told him. Who stopped him? That was the end. No more was said. Shall I go on?
No, that's okay.
And I think that's
Yeah.
a good
So,
picture.
Jim, as a practicing Catholic, I have a question to ask, and that is, how in the world would a practicing Catholic nowadays, with a young children growing up in the Catholic Church, dare to trust the clergy?
Well, see, that is where the part comes in. If you are a true Catholic, and you won't allow that to happen, and these things can be found out, but you must do your due diligence and listen to what I say. You know, this is a small majority. We always came up with a percentage of about 10 to 12% of guilty people, you know, that were involved that have destroyed everything. And that holds true with conversations like with Father Bruce Ritter, Father Paul Marks, and other priests from every type and denomination, Father Hugh Burns, and the list goes on and on. So it is very important that the parents do their job.
And what would you tell the parents to advise the kids that are staying after for religious programs, whether it's Wednesday school or, you know, whatever the Catholic Church has going on, or any church for that matter?
Yes, it's not
Youth
just Catholics,
activities.
by the way. Yeah.
Right, youth activities. What should parents tell their children so that if something like that happens, they know what to do and who to come to?
Well, that's one thing, but even more important, the parents should be parents and attend these things right with the kids and be parents. Watch your kids, find out what they're doing, and tell the kids. You know, you don't question. See, one thing, they all make mistakes, investigators. Did he do this? You never question a victim with a direct question like that, because you're leading him. These kids will answer, and I was a kid once, and we all were. We know what we did, you know, so you don't do that. You have a conversation, and you'll find out what the kids say. If all of a sudden the kid don't want to talk about religion, you got a problem. And it just goes on and on, all the different little things that you got to look for.
But today, as in years past, if you're a Catholic and you're in later elementary years or in junior high or the middle school, isn't that where you start doing things like helping light candles and
Yes.
helping serve up
The
that
altar.
Yeah, altar and all that stuff.
Okay,
yeah.
so parents don't come to that.
No, but there are things you can do with your children, and I like to give examples. This past weekend, I did a German dinner in St. Martin, and we had the kids helping. I have kids helping that are 9, 10, 11, 12 years old.
And that's wonderful. They should be
And
helping.
this way, there's more than one way to help kids. And we have forgotten that in our society, not only the church part of it, but in our whole society. We don't take care of our kids. Think of the Boy Scouts. And in my little pamphlet I have here, there is a candy store. And you will notice underneath, I have not described what a candy store is. You can ask any of these so-called experts on human trafficking and pedophilia what that is, and they'll say, oh, that's the kids who go to the candy store they can pick up. No. Candy store in this reference means it's a place such as a church, school, whatever, where they go to pick up kids. In the underground, that is known as a candy store. You see, this is why it's so important. You've got to learn the language. A kid comes home, so-and-so talked about going to the candy store. You know what it is, but if you don't know the language, and if you have somebody that needs help and they talk to you and you don't know what they're talking about, they're not going to trust you. You see what I'm getting at? And this is why this is so important. And it happens all the time. I talk to these people and they tell me, oh, you know what that means. I just had a call last night from Oregon, a victim that is involved, and she was here in Minnesota. It's part of the smiley face killer thing. Why does she call me? And I've asked her, well, I can trust you and you know what I'm talking about. And she had me put on the phone with one of the people that's her counselor, and they had no clue what she was talking about. So how can you counsel someone if you have no idea what she's talking about?
Well, it seems like wheels within wheels in this situation. I mean, you don't want parents to loom over their children and
Yes.
be there for every moment of their lives. You want kids to have some independent interaction with other adults, and who's safer than the church, one would think, a youth church group or whatever. So that's difficult. And then when you try to talk to them, your language isn't smart enough and isn't up to the minute enough. Sometimes they feel as if you're just ignorant and you're not capable of carrying the burden of the information. I don't know. I don't know where to begin.
Let me just go one step further with this. If you have grandchildren or anybody, ask them, who do they trust at church? Who do they trust at school? Is there a teacher they trust or anything? I will guarantee you, they go, no.
Really?
Yeah, ask them, do it once.
Okay.
Is there anybody you would trust? Oh, no. I run into that because these kids talk to me. And like this thing that you just read, it's powerful. There's another one of a victim. It's so nasty that you don't even want to read it on your show. But there's a victim, and I will use her name. It's the daughter of Ed Hensel. And when Ed called me, he called me on a Sunday night. He said, Jim, you got to come over real quick. My 36-year-old daughter came home to commit suicide. She had been molested by Father Eckroth. And when I got there, she was sitting there looking in the flames of the stove in the basement. And I said, she's never going to make the night. Well, I stayed there 3 hours, and I talked to her. She's alive to this day yet. But when you read the anguish that this girl lives in, for her to be alive today is a miracle. And that's why I say these people can be helped, but you got to know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And I have a whole thing written on how this should work, how I call it strategies and techniques. There are ways to do this, but why don't I get a call? Because nobody wants to know. So,
Well, or they don't know, and they don't know where to.
Well, I think, given the history of what's happened with the abuse in the church and how rampant it is, if I had young kids today that were growing up in the church, I would strongly advise that they not be involved with any kind of these helping ministries where it's just one or two kids with one adult priest or a group of priests that can be in such a private setting and can be taken advantage of like that. I would.
And then if the church did what it should do, is clean house and admit, as I put in the very first part of my thing on what the church should do, which was agreed upon by John Paul I, Father Bruce Ritter had agreed, and they realized that this is the way it had to be done. They didn't do anything to cover up continued. They tried to crucify Father Bruce Ritter. You see what I'm saying? It's just like, well, you said I went to St. John's, met with the abbot, did everything. We had this victim, and what Father did to help him, and then he got stopped. My question is, who stopped him?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
A more powerful person with more money.
Or an organization, or the higher ups, you know. So, yes, and that is why I do these shows and hope that people call, but I have gone all over and done this. 99% of the time, nobody ever calls back. Why? This
Somebody
is the
got to
question.
him, yeah.
So don't expect miracles to come, but at least we try.
Well, at least there's a place to begin.
Yeah.
For families and
Yeah.
for victims.
And it's troubling also that programs like Hands of Hope, they're local here, encourage victims to get a restraining order, and they help them through that whole process. But then, how hard is it to break a restraining order? How often do we read in the paper about anybody breaking a restraining order?
And it just becomes
Happens
one
all
more
the
charge
time.
against them, but it's in one of many, so it's.
It's like I said, when politically correct, feel good, do good people, and if you want to read on top of what Dr. Jung said, oh no, where is this one here? I have on,
Oh, yes, I do know which one you mean. Here we
yeah,
go.
have you got it there?
Is
Yeah,
that it?
you can read that.
When you have politically correct, feel-good, do-good intellectuals and politicians in ivory towers solving the problems of the people in the gutters of the world, you have utter chaos.
And I think with
That
that,
makes
we should
perfect
end the
sense,
show.
yeah.
And that's what the problem is.
And
I have other words I can use, but you can't use it on your show.
Right. I want to remind the listeners, the viewers, that Theresa and I have been trying to get recruits, other moms, grandmothers, people, dads, grandfathers, interested in a sex trafficking victims group here together to help potential victims. We know they're out there.
Yeah.
How often do we read in the Morrison County Record alone of the crime that's being committed here, and yet no one dares to step forward and be part of this? Now, if it's because of this the stigma with my name being attached to it, that's absolutely not a valid reason
No.
for people to be coming forward.
No, it's not.
And so I want to just give my phone number for people to contact me. I think Chris is still maybe playing the community announcement that Theresa and I are looking for people to help us form a human trafficking group here. My phone number is 320-360-3931, and I would just ask that the public call me between the hours of 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. Because I get tired in the evening, my back hurts, and I need to lay down. And I have animals and others that I take care of, and getting up early is not, I don't do that real often, so.
Well, I just want to add one other thing. When we met with Harold Laswell after we were stopped with the State Select Committee on Crime, I said to Harold, I says, how am I ever going to get anything done? And he said the most prophetic thing I ever heard. He said, when the mothers stand up and make the men do what it takes to protect their children, that's when you can do this. And he cited historical things where the mothers, you get a bunch of mothers together and they march. And I'm going to tell you, there's no politician, no cop, no sheriff that can withstand that. And that's why the only way to do this is get the mothers organized. So with
But
that,
first we need the information to get out there
Yep.
so people know that there are big problems that need to be dealt with.
good.
Well, I think we've probably run way past our time, and which is not at all unusual for us. I want to thank you, Jim, for coming
Thank
to
you for
talk about
having
this very important topic, and thank you, Robin, for everything you had to contribute. And I'm Theresa Skorseth. This is Can We Talk, and we'll see you, I hope, very soon.